Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. A great night, special night tonight. We have a great guest with us, a special and dear scholar from the UK. We all see him on YouTube. Today he is live with us, blood and flesh, alhamdulillah, brother Hamza Tzortzis. The lecture will be about atheism and the scientific method. Anything that's related to that, inshallah, he might basically even go further, broader. So I'd like to welcome Brother Hamza, inshallah. And we'll start the lecture. We'll do like 45 minutes. And afterwards we can take some questions, alhamdulillah ta'ala. Again, this event is organized by the i3institute in cooperation with Anatolia Masjid here in this specific building, alhamdulillah. Barakallah fikum, and without further ado, I'll let Brother Hamza, inshallah, go ahead. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
It's good seeing you all here. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, very nice big mosque, Turkish mosque. Alhamdulillah. Any Turks in the audience? Only one, two. Merhaba, nasılsınız? Çok güzel. Basically, I was told to give this talk about a few hours ago. So we drove from Guelph. And it was an interesting journey. I slept most of it, alhamdulillah, I'm a bit jet lagged. So today we're going to be talking about science, atheism and related topics. And I think this is a very important topic for everybody, whether you're young, old, an aspiring parent, a current parent, a future parent, because these ideas are affecting the hearts and minds of Muslims, especially in the West. Because in the West, we have this idea of scientific rationalism. Now this doesn't mean science is a bad thing. Science is a beautiful thing. Science is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. It is part of His rahmah, part of His mercy. However, this kind of excessive, fundamentalist scientific rationalism is an approach that basically says that science is the only way to form conclusions about the world and reality. In essence, it's like a form of scientism, which, as I just said, is basically saying science is the only method to use, the only way to use to form conclusions about the world and reality. And therefore, when this is instilled in the hearts and mind of human beings and Muslims, they have the wrong world view. They have the wrong lenses in which they see the world. So we want to clarify this matter. And I'm going to do it in a way that doesn't refer to any Muslims, but refers to Western academics. Because the interesting thing about this whole fundamentalist scientific rationalism is that it's been popularized by some people. But the real knowledge and the real academic reality is that science is a limited, ever-changing method of thinking. And when we understand this properly, science can never deny revelation, can never deny prophethood, and can never deny the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When someone claims this, they are number one, lying, number two, they don't know anything about the scientific method, and number three, they don't know nothing about the usul, the foundations of science, or the philosophy of science. The only thing science can do is two things: keep silent on the matter, or suggest some evidence that you may be able to reason upon to infer that maybe there is a designer or creator. But it can never deny the existence of God. Why? Because who is Allah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, He's uniquely one, and He's transcendent. Allah says in the Quran, لَيْسَ كِمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. There is nothing like unto Him. If I made this bottle, I don't become the bottle. I am different from the bottle. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe. He is not part of the universe. He is distinct and disjoint from the universe. But yet, He is closer to us than our jugular vein via His knowledge. Now, from this perspective, science can't deny that truth, because it's outside of the universe, outside of the kind of physical cosmos, the physical reality. And science can only deal with physical things. And that's why science can never deny the existence of God. And for someone to claim such a thing, they are lying, irrational, know nothing about science. So I just want to quickly just summarize some aspects of the scientific method so you guys understand what science is. Science comes from the Latin word scientia, which means knowledge. And there's a very good summary of the scientific method by the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell. He said, science is the attempt to discover, by means of observation and reasoning based upon it, particularly you have observations of the physical world, and then you reason upon those observations to see if there's any connections between them. Essentially, science is understanding the connections between physical objects. Okay? Now, a lot of this material has been taken from my postgrad course in philosophy, and I've been doing a specialist module on the philosophy of science, so I'm not making this up. Now, the first point is that science focuses on the physical world. So it can only address questions concerning things that can relate to physical reality. For example, asking a scientist this question, where is the soul? What is the soul? What is meaning? These questions are outside of the scientific method. Outside of the scientific method. Even questions referring to consciousness are outside of the scientific method. There was a famous paper that was written by Professor Thomas Nagel. It was called, I believe, I've read it, but I forgot the title. It was something like, what is it like for a bat to be a bat? Basically, it was written in the 1970s, and he was referring to the subjective conscious awareness. That when I have some water, Bismillah, that was very nice. There is a inner subjective experience of me having this water. You can never know what that experience is. It's unique to me. I have an internal, unique, subjective experience, also known as a phenomenal state or qualia in language of neuroscience. But ignore that for a moment. The point is we all have internal, inner subjective experiences. And science cannot understand that because science is third-person objective data. The subjectivity is first-person subjective awareness. And therefore science can never address this. If you were to understand all the neurochemical pathways in our brain, and you correlate it to the fact I'm drinking water, you will still never be able to find out what it's like for Hamza to drink water. So science focuses on the physical world. And then he aims to explain the physical world. So science is a collective institution, wants to keep on doing lots of experiments on the physical world. Are you with me so far? Are you sure? Good. Now, not only does it aim to explain the physical world and it focuses on the physical world, but it uses testable ideas or hypotheses to basically understand the physical world. And for a testable idea or hypothesis to be testable, it has to logically generate specific outcomes. I repeat, for an idea to be testable or for a hypothesis to be testable, it must logically generate specific outcomes. For example, here's my hypothesis. What is the effect of coffee on Hamza Tzortzis when he's jet lagged? What is the effect of coffee on Hamza Tzortzis when he's jet lagged? There are three possibilities, three outcomes. Number one, there is an effect. Number two, there is no effect. Rather, there's two outcomes. There's three in a way, because it could be an increased effect, in terms of it basically affects me positively that I wake up. It could decrease, it can have a decrease, a negative effect, it makes me more sleepy, or it has no effect. The point here is, for ideas or hypotheses to be testable, they must logically generate specific outcomes. And not only do you have the ideas and the hypotheses, but you have to do the evidence. You have to do the science. You have to do the work. Preferably by many different scientists, in different contexts, so you understand the reality even better. So that's science in a nutshell, the science. Now what are the limitations? Now there are a few limitations I want to talk about. Number one, science is limited to what they can observe. Number two, science is amoral. It doesn't mean science is like immoral. Amoral is something different, I'm going to explain. Number three, science can't test the personal. Like the inner subjective realities, meaning, subjectivity. Science can't explain the why, and science cannot explain metaphysical questions. A metaphysical question is a question that is, in a way, referring to things outside of the physical world, or before the physical. For example, does God exist is a metaphysical question. So let's go to the first limitation. The first limitation of science is that it's limited to observations. Now let me ask you a question, brothers and sisters. As a scientist, are you going to have an infinite number of observations? No. Are you going to have all the observations required for the particular phenomenon? No, you can never say such a thing. Because there may be a future observation or another observation you haven't encountered. And you may encounter in the future, and that observation may contradict your previous observations, and therefore your previous conclusions. We've seen this before. In the 1900s, we had a particular view of the universe, that the universe was a steady state. It was static, it had no beginning, no end. But now we know the universe is dynamic from that perspective. The universe is expanding. That changed because of more observations. That changed because of more observations. And those observations were understood because of new technology. So the point here is, you can never claim to have the total set of observations for a particular phenomenon. You may have another observation in the future that you haven't observed now that can contradict previous conclusions. Does this make sense? Good. So this is why even philosophers of science like Elliot Sober, in his essay called Empiricism, he says at any moment scientists are limited by the observations they have at hand. You also have other philosophers of science, Hugh Gulch Jr., in his Scientific Method in Brief, published by Cambridge, he said the most obvious limitation is that science will never observe, know, and explain everything about even science's own domain, the physical world. Also, science is amoral. What does this mean? This means that science cannot provide a basis, a foundation for morality. A foundation for morality. Because to use science as a foundation for morality, then morals cease to be objective and they cease to have any meaning. Because when we think of morals, we think morals are binding and objective. Not all of them. Sometimes we disagree. But generally speaking, there are some fundamentals like killing an innocent child. We all believe killing an innocent child is objectively morally wrong. And by objective, we mean it's outside of the limited opinion, outside of the limited mind, outside of the limited feelings, right? And emotions. So if that's the case, it requires some grounding. What is the source for this moral? What's the nature of this moral? And this is called moral ontology in the language of philosophy. But the point here is, science cannot provide a basis for objective morality. Why? Because what does science say? Science say we were just reared based upon certain biological conditions. If those biological conditions were different, our morals would be different. So there's nothing objective or meaningful about them. Even Charles Darwin, in his book, The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex, he said, if men were reared under precisely the same conditions as the hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. Likewise, if you take this logic, if we were to be reared under precisely the same conditions as the nurse shark, then we would think it should be okay to rape women. Because nurse sharks, according to National Geographic, forces themselves on their mates. So if we're just a byproduct of biological conditioning, then what meaning and objectivity do our morals have? Because our morals therefore would only be dependent on these inevitable biological changes. Another aspect of the limitation of science is you can't test the personal. You can't test the personal. Like even if you were to use words to describe personal feelings, you could still never find out inside them what that really means. Because words are vehicles to meaning. And a meaning is a reflection of what's happening inside you, that internal subjectivity. And that's why you'll never be able to find out what it's like for somebody to really be depressed, or what it's like for somebody to have a hot chocolate, or what it's like for Abdullah to fall in love, or what it's like for Fatima to fix her car, or whatever, right? The point here is, these are inner subjective experiences, and this is called the hard problem of consciousness in the philosophy of the mind. That they cannot access the first-person reality. They cannot access that subjectivity. They may find out some neurochemical firings in the brain and correlate them and see certain patterns, but they will never be able to understand what it is like for that particular conscious organism to be in a conscious state. And this is called the hard problem of consciousness. So science cannot test that person. Also, science can't answer the why. If my auntie baked you a cake now, as a scientist, you can find out what temperature was used, what kind of chemical bonds are in the cake, dipeptide bond, Van der Waals bonds, whatever bonds you have in chemistry. You can find so much stuff, even the ingredients, which is the science. But if I asked you, why did my auntie bake you the cake? How can you use science to find out the why? You can't. It's impossible. The intentions behind that cake, the only way you can find out is by asking her. So science can't really answer the why. Finally, concerning the limitations of science, science can't answer the metaphysical question. Meaning, does God exist? Like we discussed this already. But basically what we're saying here is that since science focuses on the physical domain, the physical processes, the physical empirical realities, then science cannot deny the existence of God. It's de-scoped, it's outside of the scientific method, this question. It could stay silent on the matter. It could suggest some evidence that you could infer upon to conclude there is a designer or creator, but it could never have any positive evidence to deny the existence of Allah. This is impossible. Because it's like having two rooms, and you only observe one room, and in this room you say there are 100 chairs, and then just because there are 100 chairs in this room, you say there are no chairs in the other room. On what basis? So that's why science can never prove atheism, or rather science cannot deny Allah. Even the philosopher of science, Hugh G. Gotch Jr., he says to insist that science supports atheism is to get high marks for enthusiasm, but low marks for logic. Now I want to focus very quickly on the philosophy of science. I don't want to get too much detail. I could talk about the hypothetical deductive model, holism. I could talk about inference is the best explanation. I could talk about so much crazy stuff that will make you fall asleep. But let me just focus on one key thing, which is induction. Now, induction is basically kind of the bedrock to scientific thinking. And induction is a thinking process where you move from the specific to the general. You move from the specific to the general. In other words, you move from the limited set of observations to an unobserved thing. You move from the known to the unknown. Let me give you an example. I've observed 1,000 white sheep. Therefore, all sheep are white. I've moved from limited observations, 1,000 white sheep, and I've concluded for the general, they are all white. I've gone from the known, there are 1,000 white sheep, and I've concluded for the unknown, all sheep are white. I haven't observed all white sheep. And this is called probabilistic reasoning. It's not deductive, meaning it's not certain, it's uncertain. Because there may be a future observation that denies your conclusions based on that limited data. For instance, you've seen 1,000 white sheep and you conclude all sheep are white, then you go to Europe and then you see a black sheep. So therefore, all sheep are not white. Do you see? So from this perspective, the whole of science, generally speaking, is based on this thinking. You have limited observations and you conclude for the general. This is why you will never be able to have certainty in science. You're not supposed to have certainty in science. That's the beauty of science. It's supposed to change. There's no such thing as certain facts. Yes, there are scientific facts, but the F is italics. It's not bold, and it's in grey colour. Because there is always a possibility of a paradigm shift, radical change, new observations in the future, and that's why we need to be very careful when we understand science. And this is why the likes of David Hume and many others, old philosophers of the West, they concluded that you can never never, ever, ever claimed certainty using science. Now you may think, but Hamza, science works. It works. We have the iPhone, the iPad, we have computers, we have cars that can drive themselves. We have amazing things, we have keyhole surgery. Science works. I don't care about your problem of induction. I don't care that science doesn't lead to certainty. I know it's certain because it works. Now this is what you call a Richard Dawkins argument. And Richard Dawkins is not very intelligent. By the way, scientists are embarrassed of him, by the way. He hasn't published one peer-reviewed journal. Do you know that? He hasn't published one peer-reviewed journal. His main piece of research was about the selfish gene, and that wasn't new knowledge. He borrowed it from someone else. And this is why there's a big danger of the popularization, how people popularize science, and what science really is. Like there was a really interesting cartoon which basically says, there's a guy reading a newspaper who's not a scientist, and he says, wow, that's the scientific evidence, it's proof, woohoo, right? But then the scientist, he reads it and says, what a load of rubbish. What was his methods? And they go to the source, the right paper, not the newspaper, but the academic paper that the newspaper referred to, and they say, there's some gaps here, there's some problems here, it's all speculative. And there's a difference between popular science and what should be really understood. And that's why the atheist movement latches onto the popularized culture and they use it as almost like the gospel truth. They're very evangelical with this stuff. Now, Richard Dawkins was asked in a public lecture, well, how do you justify science? Because the whole problem of induction comes up. We may have a future observation that denies previous conclusions. And he basically said, science works. Science works, that's why it leads to certainty, that's why it's true. But that is wrong. This is a logical fallacy. And listen to me very carefully. Just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. I repeat, just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. This is well known in the philosophy of science. Well known. Let me give you an example, the idea of phlogiston. Phlogiston was a workable theory in the 1700s. Phlogiston was a workable theory in the 1700s. And phlogiston was this idea that in combustible objects, in objects that would burn, there was phlogiston within them. And when they burned, they released phlogisticated air. Now, in 1772, Dan Rutherford used this workable theory and he discovered the truth of nitrogen. He discovered nitrogen. But a few years after, they realized phlogiston was a load of rubbish. So what lesson does that teach us? It teaches us that you can get a truth from a workable theory that is actually false. So just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. And that's what you have to understand. So that's not an argument to justify science. So these are the kind of main limitations we discussed, okay? So now we know we're in a position to understand that science does not lead to atheism. But what I'm going to do now is show to you that the assumptions of science leads to Allah. The assumptions of science leads to Allah. Let me explain why. In order for you to do science, you need two things, brothers and sisters. Because all theories, all approaches have assumptions. In order for you to do science, you have to do two things. You need two things. Number one, a mind that you can trust. A mind that you can trust. If you never trust your mind, you can't do science. Because you can't trust your reasoning upon the data. You always be in doubt. So you need a mind that you can trust. Cognitive faculties that can lead to the truth. Yeah, they may get it wrong sometimes, but ultimately they can lead to the truth. You have to have a mind you trust. Cognitive faculties that you trust. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is that you believe, and we believe, that the universe is intelligible. Meaning the universe has some form of order. It can be rationalized. It can be understood. So these are actually the assumptions of science. No one disagrees with this, by the way. From Dawkins to Hawkins to Krauss to a mouse. Everybody agrees that these are the assumptions of science. You have to trust your mind. You have to have a mind that you trust, rational faculties, cognitive faculties you can trust that can lead to the truth. And you need an intelligible universe, which is a universe that's ordered, a universe that can be rationalized. So without getting too complicated, how do you best explain these assumptions? How do you best explain the fact that we need minds that we trust to do science, and we need a universe that is intelligible? How do we best explain this reality? Because under atheism, you can't explain nothing. Because atheism usually adopts the worldview called naturalism, which basically says that there is no supernatural and everything can be explained by physical processes. So if there's no supernatural and everything can be explained by physical processes, then how can you justify these assumptions with naturalism, with atheism? You can't. Because you're basically saying your rational faculties came about as a result of non-rational, cold, blind, random physical processes. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. That your rational faculties that you trust, your mind that you trust, which is a necessary assumption to do science, just came from cold, non-rational, random physical processes. To believe in such a thing is like believing something could come from nothing. There is an Arabic saying that basically says, I cannot give you something that I don't have. I cannot give you something that I don't have. If I have $10, I can give you $10. If I don't have $10, I can't give you $10. So if matter doesn't have rationality, if matter is cold and non-rational, if physical processes are cold and non-rational, how can they give rise to rationality? How? Do you see the point here? So science can't even justify, rather not science, atheism and naturalism can't even justify the needed, necessary assumption to do science in the first place. The minute you open the door to the house of science, God is required. Because you need a rational mind that you can trust, a cognitive faculty you can trust in order to do science in the first place. How do you best explain these cognitive faculties? It can't be by naturalism that everything is explained by physical processes. Because from non-rationality cannot give rise to rationality. Now there is an argument though. They may say, hold on a second, our rational faculties came from natural selection, from evolution. This is rubbish. Absolute bakwas, as they say in Urdu, yeah? It's rubbish. I tell you why. Because natural selection is about survival, not truth. Natural selection doesn't care about truth. Now they may argue, but if you know the truth of your environment, you're more likely to survive. There's nothing necessary about this though. Because you can have false beliefs that lead to survival. For example, if I'm living in the jungle, and I believe the false belief that all mushrooms are poisonous, do I survive or not? I survive. Because I don't eat the poisonous mushrooms. There are some healthy mushrooms, but I don't have to eat them anyway, I eat something else. So you can have the false belief that all mushrooms are poisonous, and it leads to survival. Like Professor O'Brien makes this point. And he says, well, there's nothing necessary about natural selection leading to truth. Because it's about survival, it's not about truth. So what best explains the fact that we have a rational mind that we can trust? What best explains this, brothers and sisters, is an all-wise, all-knowing being that created the universe with human beings who have a mind, who have minds that can lead to knowledge. And the beautiful thing about this is not any old knowledge. Allah has given us an aql, an intellect, that we can trust to observe the universe and the micro-universe within ourselves, and in themselves do they not see, in order to conclude that Allah exists and He deserves to be worshipped. So that's the interesting thing. Some neo-atheists, they use science to bash religion. But the minute you even do science, you require the assumption that you need to trust your own rational faculties in your mind, and that cannot be explained via atheism. It can only be explained by theism, by the existence of God. Make sense? Amazing, huh? So, how long has I been speaking for? Half an hour, good. So I have no time.
Yes, 15 more minutes. And we can take questions after if people want to either write it down if they'd like to, or they can stand up afterwards, inshallah.
So moving on from this, we need to teach our children, our communities, these very kind of simple but basic arguments. But I want you to understand this as well, that our deen is not just based on arguments. We believe in Islam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a fitrah within us. A fitrah, an innate disposition. An innate disposition. There is an innate capacity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created within us that allows us to form the conclusion that Allah exists and He deserves to be worshipped. This is very important. And when you use Quran, when you use Sunnah, when you use your aql reasoning, sound reasoning, when you have a spiritual experiences maybe, these act as trigger points to awaken the fitrah. This is why don't misunderstand the role of ayat in the Quran. When ayat refer to natural phenomena, do not think that they refer to science. They don't. We're superimposing stuff onto the Quran. The Quran is greater than science. Science is limited, it changes. So there are no scientific miracles. This is a ridiculous approach in the da'wah. I would say it's one of the biggest bid'ah. I'm not joking. Because we've reduced the Quran to limited human knowledge. To limited human knowledge. How can you use something that changes to prove something that doesn't change? It doesn't make sense. The Quran is greater than this. So the ayat, when Allah says, for example, look at the camel, how it was created. Look at the sun and the moon, and they are swimming. Yasbahuna, they're swimming in an orbit. These things are for everybody. The 7th century man, the 21st century man. For you to conclude that regardless of my scientific understanding of these phenomena, regardless of my limited scientific understanding of this phenomena, there still implies, you can still conclude that there must be a wisdom behind this and a creative power behind this. And that should lead you to understand that Allah deserves to be worshipped. And also these ayat are there to help you spiritually. Don't reduce the Quran to these abstract scientific notions. It's for the heart. When Allah says, you're a nutfa, nutfatin min maniyyin, you're a nutfa from a semen, you're a despised fluid. Allah doesn't want you to go to the embryology books and find out what the process is and try to change the language of the Quran just to try and make it fit to limited knowledge. This is rubbish. Allah is trying to say to us, reflect where you came from. You're a despised fluid. You came from semen. So be humble. Don't think that you were projected from your mother's womb with a suitcase and a tie and you think you're an adversary to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be humble. And you're not an individual, this neoliberal bakwas rubbish. You're individual, meaning you're so dependent on other people. You were dependent on the physical causes that Allah created in order for you to be formed from this piece of despised mess. So understand, you must humble yourself. Because being arrogant is a barrier between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a barrier to divine mercy, rahmah and love. So reflect. You are a despised fluid, so humble yourself. Understand that we're part of this interconnected family of different physical and spiritual causes. Humble yourself. Who are you? Think about this. This should be on your Facebook profile. The despised mess, not your Photoshop pictures with your diamond hijabs and diamond beards. Right? Honestly, this is serious stuff. This is how we should approach the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when Allah says you are an alaqa, which also means a blood clot or a leech or a worm and many other meanings, Allah's not supposed to, He's not telling us to find out the physical detail. Because he wants to address the 7th century man and the 51st century man, for all people. So the Quran is very multi-layered and multi-leveled from that perspective. So look at the deeper meanings. For example, maybe we're leeches in our mother's womb. Allah also means a worm or a leech. Maybe we're a leech. What's a leech? It's a parasite. It drains the resources of its host. If I put a leech on my hand, it'll be sucking my blood and it'll roll over. I won't gain anything. The leech gains everything. Likewise, the baby is very similar. If you study how babies are formed, you see that it drains the mothers, it raids her blood, it drains her resources. So maybe Allah is saying you are a parasite in your mother's womb. You are a parasite. She willingly and peacefully and willfully gave up her resources and her energy for 9 months and even after that much more just for you to be alive. So humble yourself and be loving to your mother. And understand that you are dependent on her, and ultimately she and you and everything else is dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a far more profound way of looking at the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, we have a fitrah. It's an innate disposition. And don't forget, we have the pre-temporal timeless covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when Allah asked the progeny of Adam alayhi salam, who is your Lord? Am I not your Lord? And we said, of course. So the role of the fitrah is that, as you know in the hadith of Sahih Muslim, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that every child is born in a state of fitrah, but his parents basically change him. There's a socialization effect that deviates the fitrah, that changes the fitrah. Our job is to preserve the fitrah of our children. And when you use Quran, Sunnah, experiences, even sound aql, sound reasoning, all of these things awaken the fitrah in order to understand Allah exists and He deserves to be worshipped. So let us summarize what we discussed today. Number one, we discussed the limitations of science, the philosophy of science. It doesn't lead to certainty. It can't deny God's existence. Science doesn't lead to atheism. Even if it works, it doesn't mean it's true. And we discussed the fact that actually a key assumption of science is that you have to trust your rational faculties that they lead to the truth. What best explains that? Naturalism, atheism, or theism? We already explained that it can't be naturalism or atheism or natural selection, and it's theism. The minute you do science, you assume something that requires God's existence, that is best explained by God's existence. And then we ended by talking about the Quran and how to approach it, considering the ayat and focusing on the fitrah. So hopefully this has planted seeds in your heart and mind to take this further. And this is why this shouldn't be a case of that you have a spiritual insulin, spiritual diabetes rather. So you come here and this is your spiritual insulin, and you put it in your body and you feel great. After you look at the masjid, it's the same. The aim of these type of talks is to plant the seed in your heart and mind so you can continue further. So you can do your own learning, research, understanding, discussions, speak to your ulama, join i3, you know. That's a shameless plug. Or did I say it right? Was it right spelling? My tajweed bad, yeah? i3, yeah? Okay, no problem. So, may Allah bless you all. Keep united. Use this masjid, wallahi. This is going to be crushing on you on the Day of Judgment. I know I'm tired, so my defenses are down. But this masjid would crush on your heads on the Day of Judgment. Maybe, metaphorically, because you're going to be accountable for it. Honestly, all the money you spent on these beautiful things, pillars, etc., carpets, heating, God knows what you had. We have jacuzzi as well. It's an amazing masjid. MashaAllah, tabarakallah. But you know, think about this. If the Prophet ﷺ was alive, and he was given money, and he was given the choice to add a nice carpet and some pillars, or to use that money for the da'wah, what would he do? You tell me. Do you have minarets, by the way?
No minarets on this list.
Ah, that's good. So you know sometimes we build domes and minarets. It's a waste of money. I don't think there's any base in our Islamic tradition to have dome and minarets. Wallahi, the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, you wouldn't even sleep in. You wouldn't even put your dog in there. That's how messed up we've become. So when you look at this bricks and mortar, it's fantastic, we need it, it's good for the youth, for facilities. But don't underuse it, brothers and sisters. Use it. And if it's been underused, then account the committee. I'm not trying to create fitna here, by the way. You do it with rahmah and love. You do it with rahmah and love. And in privacy. I love you. We love you. You're our leaders. We want you to be our leaders. But you know, we've got such an amazing space. The sisters want to do private halaqat or something, or they want to do something here, or the brothers want to do something here. We want to do a da'wah course, or we want to, bring some non-Muslims for open day, an amazing hall here. Let's do some food. Let's do some exhibition. This is a perfect space. Use it. And it's very important to have that mindset. 80 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and the death of the Prophet ﷺ, the ulama are united on the fact that the greatest calamity of the ummah was the death of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, 80 years after his death, where were we? We were in Multan, in Pakistan, and we were in Spain, spreading the peace and harmony of Islam. And it was 82 years after his death, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that the Muslims decided to fix his mosque. It was still dripping with water. This means that the early Muslims had the right mindset. It wasn't about buildings and pestle and mortar and bricks. It was about developing people of substance. And yes, you need the bricks to develop people to keep them warm, especially in Toronto weather. But I'm trying to plant something in your head to understand the vision. Okay? And do with love, do with rahmah. As the Prophet said to Aisha, "Oh Aisha, be kind, be compassionate." If there's compassion and kindness in something, it elevates it. If you remove it, it degrades it. Anyway, Jazakallah khairan, man of best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Hamza, may Allah bless you, Jazakallah khair for this great speech and inspiring, mind-stimulating lecture. Now we open it up basically for questions. If you'd like to ask questions, you can raise your hands. I might give you a couple minutes to basically start thinking about it. I might start with a question myself. So today in class, in the i3 class, in the Young Guy program, we were discussing just evolution and the scientific method and all that kind of stuff. And one of the questions that one of the students were asking, we had a long discussion about it, is how do you when you debate with an atheist, what would be the proper arguments to really discuss the whole issue of the evolution of species? Especially when we're talking about basically the apes to the human, or pre-human to human. And what is the scientific evidence that's there, and what is the theory from the science really there? That might be a big question. Show me.
Bismillah, it's a very good question. Firstly, you shouldn't really debate anybody. Debates have their place in a certain social context, but generally speaking, you don't debate anyone, you have good discussions. Like when Allah says, and debate with them in ways that are best, jadilhum, debate with them in ways that are best, Jamakshari said this is without any gruffness, with no harshness. Okay, it's very important to understand. Now, considering evolution, firstly, evolution doesn't deny God's existence. Right? We have to understand this. Evolution doesn't have a foot in the door. It comes like millions of years after, or even billions of years after, right? Concerning the initiation of the cosmos, or, the foundational laws of the universe. Now, evolution is actually not a problem at all. If you understood what we learned in the first 10 minutes of this presentation, science is limited, the problem of induction, there may be a future observation that denies previous conclusions. If you understand this, and you know that just because something works, it doesn't mean it's true. Even if something has predictive power, doesn't mean it's true. Because many force theories have great predictive power sometimes, according to Professor Elliot Solberg. So once you understand this, all you need to say is this: evolution is the best that we have, right? It doesn't mean it's the truest. Because currently, according to the scientists, it's the best that they have. Okay? It doesn't mean it's the truest. It doesn't mean it's the truth. So as the Muslim scientist, you could accept the framework, the model, because frankly, there is no other alternative at the moment that gives predictions. Let's just be fair. Even intelligent design doesn't give predictions. So scientifically, it doesn't have the same value. So they have this theory of evolution. Accept it from a limited human scientific perspective. You don't accept it into your aqidah or your creed. No. You play with it, see what happens, and you know that it doesn't mean it's right. That's the easiest way of putting it. So when someone says, theory of evolution denies your book, you say, no, it doesn't really, because where does the theory of evolution come from? It has a philosophy, the scientific philosophy, problem of induction. Is it certain? No. Is it 100% fact? No. My book is. I have reasons for that, and I'll show you. And that's it. There's no need for reconciliation. That's the easiest way of doing it. Now, to go into the science could end up being embarrassing, because you have almost like a consensus of scientists that agree with this perspective. And what you need to understand as well is, even within the theory of evolution, there is ikhtilaf, there is huge differences. They're moving away from the tree of life, now they're going to the bush of life. Honestly. Then they got issues with genetics, epigenetics, horizontal gene transfer. Lots of things are changing now. And key things in the theory of evolution. But as a whole, I wouldn't say deny it scientifically. You could deny it creedally and philosophically, because you know you have another source of knowledge, which is the Quran, and you accept it. But from a practical perspective, you say, yeah, I agree it's the best that we have, but it's not true though, but it's the best that we have. And that deals with all the arguments. You don't have to debate it anymore. Then you can talk about Allah in His book. It's actually that simple. Remember, Allah is Al-Hakim, the wise. He has the totality of wisdom and of knowledge. We have the particular fragmentary pieces of knowledge. In other words, Allah has the picture, we have the pixel. And science is the pixel. And sometimes we get it wrong. And we've seen in the history of science, we've got it wrong so many times. So why do you think this Darwinism thing is going to be wahi? This is haqq. It's not. It's the best that we have practically. There's no current alternative that has strong predictive power. Accept it from a scientific paradigm, from the pixel, but don't bring it into your aqidah or creed. You don't, because it's dhanni anyway. It's dhanni, it's speculative. So yeah, I accept the theory of evolution is the best that we have in science, but it may not be the truest. But by the way, forget about that, sir. Let's talk about God. We've got good evidence He exists and He deserves worship. I've got good evidence that this Prophet, Muhammad ﷺ, is His final Prophet. And I've got good evidence concerning this Quran. And that's it. It becomes a non-issue. And when you do that, then people are fine. It's just a non-issue. We only make it an issue because we think that the science is the gospel truth. It's never going to change. It's haqq. And therefore we have to reconcile. You don't need to reconcile something dhanni with something that is certain. You don't need to do that. So just accept it for what it is. Scientific method, it changes. Evolution is evolving. You get the point?
So anybody wants to ask some questions, you can put your hands up, inshallah. Fadl. Stand up please and speak up as loud as you
His name's Osman, by the way. And he's a budding neuroscientist.
So on the same question, just building on that question, would you say that our problem is not really with, because science changes, but do you think that we as Muslims don't deny data, we don't deny, for example, the existence of a certain species or a fossil at a certain time, but it's more of the interpretive tools that science uses. For example, naturalism, materialism. So science, as we as Muslims interpret things based on Quran and Sunnah, with the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and miracles exist. But science comes from the presumption and the assumption that there is no such thing as miracles, and that we interpret things based on, everything has a material cause. And so do you think that sometimes, even if very hypothetically, it doesn't change evolution? Our problem is not with the data, but do you think it's more with the philosophical tools that they use to interpret it?
So yeah, the question was basically very quickly for those who didn't hear it is our problem. He's saying, is our problem as Muslims, is it more with the tools that underlie the scientific method as science rather than the data, because the data is more of observations?
It's a good question. Our problem is both in a way, because the data can change. The minute you think it's certain, it means that this is all the data you're going to have. So that's the problem. And yes, the problem is with the interpretive tools, because science has this thing called methodological naturalism, which basically says that you cannot bring in divine activity in any scientific conclusion. So, from the minute you open the door, you can't entertain the God question. So yeah, you're right. So we see things in a totally different way. Now, based on your question, you have to distinguish between evolution and the theory of evolution or Darwinism. They're two different things, technically. Evolution has got 6 different definitions. But generally speaking, evolution is about change. That's what it is. Change in biological organisms. This you can never deny. You deny this, you deny your aql. Yeah? Change in biological organisms. The theory of evolution is the mechanism that explains the change. We don't have a problem with evolution, we have a problem with the theory of evolution, which talks about other things like common ancestry and stuff like that. But evolution itself is just observed data. You see E. coli bacteria, and then they change. There's variation. There's genetic variation within that specific species. And that's it. There's nothing wrong with that, because we see variation amongst human beings. He's black, he's white, he's grey, he's yellow, he's Turkish, I'm Greek, that's evolved into a Pakistani. Okay? So there's all these things. So you're right, so we do question the interpretive tools, but not only just the interpretive tools, we question the underlying philosophy behind the whole framework. Because it says you can't have any God in it as a scientific explanation. Which I think Muslims don't really have a problem with anyway, per se. Because Muslims have been always understood the world as understanding the causes, which are just the manifestations of Allah's will. So it's never been a problem. The problem is that we were more humble. We said Allah knows best, this is our limited knowledge. It's the limited data, and we have a limited mind to try and understand the data, but Allah knows better. That's it. It's actually as simple as that, really. So it's not an issue, it's a non-issue. I think we made it an issue because we presumed, we traditionally in the Dawah stole stuff from the Christian apologetics, the Christian Dawah, and it affected, and I did this as well in the beginning. We all learned. And we just basically adopted the wrong approach. But it's not a problem at all. Not an issue in any shape or form.
Barakallahu. Next question, inshallah. Any questions from the sister side? Can you please stand up, inshallah? Maybe you want to come closer?
On that note, like, you know how brother said that we as Muslims understand when we're studying these things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created things like that and it's in that natural order. But as a student and, you know, like sometimes you have that will as a Muslim student to sort of give that seed of thought in their heads that, you know, there is the Creator. How can you do that in that situation without directly, you know, getting them to, like, how would you talk to Muslims that we would say, oh, there is a God and you have to believe it? You can't really say that in a university setting, you know, it's not politically correct.
Okay.
Do you want to, as a Muslim, give them that seed of thought? How can you do that?
Sure, we got the question. So the question, inshallah, is as a student of science in the university atmosphere, how would you basically introduce the idea of God to other non-Muslim students in such a class?
Yeah, I think the problem is the question. We shouldn't assume that it's politically incorrect to talk about God on campus. It's supposed to be freedom of speech, man. The whole point is you're supposed to have discussions on campus. Don't ever get a complex from this. We need to be leaders as an ummah, as a community, and say to them, isn't it interesting the minute we do science we have certain assumptions? One of them is we trust our minds. You can't use atheism to explain that. You can only use theism. Isn't that interesting? Like, oh, really? Yeah. Put that in your scientific pipe for smoking. Yeah? So be assertive. We should jump out of these complexes that we have. Honestly. I mean, even in my postgraduate course, we have seminar sessions and we have these discussions all the time. Yes, I can't be assertive to the point where I want to refute them and eat them up, yeah? I have to be careful because I'll get chucked out. Yeah, but you can still plant the seed. Still tell them. You know? I remember I even raised this question, well, how do you best explain the fact that you trust your rational faculties in absence of God? Oh, we have natural selection. Oh, that's very interesting. But isn't natural selection just about survival, not truth? And, you know, we could have false beliefs that lead to survival. And he was like, oh yeah, that's true. And I just changed the subject. Plant seeds. Just plant seeds. Just plant seeds. That's what we need to do. So there's nothing PC about it. At your uni, do you have an MSA? Join the MSA. Do the work. I mean, I remember I went to McMaster before. I've been to, what's the other one?
York.
I've been to York as well. This was years ago though. What was the other one? I've been Risons, yeah? I've been, but it's before you guys go probably still in Happies at that time, yeah? Not you, Chef, of course, yeah. So, yeah, just join your MSA, do the work, do a Dow course. I3 have a Dow course. Just empower yourself. You know, make sure that you leave a legacy on campus. Not only talk about a God's existence, that's just the beginning. To talk about the main factor, which is your whole life is to worship Allah. Teach people this. Because it would be a huge disservice to your brothers and sisters in humanity that you don't deliver that message to them in the best way that you can. There's many ways of doing it. Allah says that who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah, does righteous deeds and says I am a Muslim. This is a really great dawah strategy for you guys in Toronto. So you call to Allah, you do the good deeds, and you link the deeds to the fact that you're a Muslim. You say you're one of the Muslims. So just do that. Just have a strategy for each MSA to focus on that in a compassionate and intelligent way. Your life is about worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to worship your ego, yourself, or society. And you have to do this. Otherwise, how are you going to be empowered? You have to come together. Have to come together as an ummah. Our strength is in unity. Our strength is in unity. Because if you're divided and disunited on even very small petty things that are beyond you guys anyway, scholastic discussions that have nothing to do with you, just unite and accept differences and have bigger goals in mind, which is calling people to Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Barakallah feek. My khutbah yesterday was about unity in the community. Exactly the same point. May Allah bless you. Barakallah feek. We'll take a question here first, inshallah, because the ayat is going to go on. Stand up, please, so we can hear you better.
So my question is about when it comes to hadith, especially non-mutawatir hadith,
Okay.
that contradict with science. Should we deal with them the same way we deal with the Quran, or should we make that the fact that they contradict science a way to judge the authenticity of it?
Okay, very good question. So now he's bringing the hadith here with hadith al-ahad. Hadith al-ahad is he's saying if it contradicts science, the non-definite hadith in terms of narration, if it contradicts science, what should we do?
This is a very good question. Now, I'm only going to tell you what my chef told me. So this is not from me, and it's what I remember, and I may be wrong. So don't quote me, okay? Basically, in ilm al-hadith, you have a science called matan criticism. It's the criticism of the text itself. Because you may have an isnad, you may have a chain of narration that is fine, and that can potentially lead to sahih hadith, but the problem could be within the text itself. And this is a very, very deep science. Very deep science. To the point where they even talk about the linguistic genre. There are some hadith that are narrated by, I think, 18 companions, and it's all fine, but it was suspended or rejected based upon the fact that the language is not in line with the corpus, with the general linguistic genre of the Prophet ﷺ, right? It's very deep science, and this is classical, by the way. This is part of our early tradition. Now, there is one of the conditions that if the matan denies, for example, known historical facts, then you know it's not a sahih hadith. I believe there was a sahih hadith, or rather the chain was fine, but there was a matan that basically said, matan means text, basically said that whoever sneezes is a liar. And then the ulama said, no, this is not true, so they just rejected it, based on matan, based on what the text said itself. Now the problem I have, and many ulama have, and I'm not putting my name next to ulama deliberately, that wasn't the intention. But the problem here is that you can't deny a hadith, in my view, just because there's a current scientific statement that contradicts it. Because you're assuming the science is a fact. And you can never say that. There could be a potential future evidence that denies previous conclusions. And what you should do first and foremost is something called reconciliation. In absence of that, potentially what some ulama would do is not to reject it, but just to suspend it, saying we don't understand it. And many ulama would do this. They would say, it's a hadith, it's sahih, but we don't understand it. But to reject it just because you think something scientifically is true, that's ridiculous. That would open the door to hadith rejection on mutawatir hadith as well. Yeah, and it would lead to the rejection of Quran. And it will lead to modernism, lead to liberalism, lead to kufr, yallah. We've seen it. We've seen it in London and England, in lots of places. We've seen it. People have, it's slowly, Shaitan plays with a small hole and he makes it big, doesn't he? So just be very careful. But there is a precedent in our tradition where if some hadith go against, like, for example, direct observation, if a hadith said there are no trees on planet Earth, then okay, let's understand what this means. Try and reconcile, no reconciliation, then according to the ulama, you could suspend the hadith, for example. Yeah? But for it to be more complex theoretical stuff, like maybe on medicine, or maybe on theoretical stuff that requires more evidence and more reasoning, you cannot deny the hadith in any shape or form, because the science might change, even if you think it's true, and even if you think it predicts stuff. So the best that you can do is probably to suspend it, so we don't understand it. And many hadith, by the way, you think they're scientific, they're not. That's the irony. That is a famous hadith where the sun prostrates. Right? The sun prostrates. We all know this hadith. I get this question all the time. Oh bro, this is so unscientific. How does the sun obey Allah? How does it prostrate? And I'm like, you silly boy. Why on earth do you think this is a scientific hadith? When was the last time you saw the sun with arms and legs and a head to do sajda? You don't know the kayfiyah, you don't know the howness of what's going on here. Some ulama say it's because the sun obeys the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He placed. Everything obeys the will of Allah. Willingly or unwillingly, right? So the point here is maybe it's the sun, the prostration is the obedience to His laws, for instance. Do you see my point? We superimpose a scientific paradigm, and that's the problem. And the problem with understanding hadith and Quran is the problem of bringing baggage to hadith and Quran. We bring baggage to it, isn't it? And that's why the people of Ulul al-Bab, the people of Lub means basically coming to something with no previous baggage, with purity. That's pure reason, pure rationality, not with any kind of intellectual social baggage. Allow the Quran to speak to you, allow and understand it properly. We superimpose reductionist, empirical, scientific paradigms on it. And that's where sometimes we don't understand it. So, when it comes to these kinds of hadith, but obviously always go to a scholar. Always, for sure. Because of some hadith we thought were unscientific, and after a few years we thought, oh my god, this makes sense. There's a hadith that basically says that there is, I think it's an Abu Dawud, check this out, that there is an ocean underneath hot rock on Earth. There's an ocean underneath fire or hot rock. Is that scientific, bro? But do you know what they find recently? That there is an ocean bigger than the oceans on Earth underneath the hot crust. Do you believe that? It's phenomenal, isn't it? I'm not saying that's what the hadith refers to. I'm not doing that correlation. No. But it's interesting. So I'm trying to say to you, I'm just trying to show the point that science changes. And science changes sometimes to the point that embarrasses the way we've approached the Quran. Sometimes we say Quran proves the Big Bang, the heavens and earth, we close them asunder. And indeed we're expanding it, right? This is not the Big Bang. How do you know? What model of the Big Bang? Let's not read the magazines. Because Big Bang has certain data, right? Background radiation, all of this stuff. There are about 20 competing models, or there are many models to explain that data. And they disagree with each other, those models. Quantum fluctuation model, oscillating model, the Friedman, the i3 model, this model, that model. Crazy stuff, right? So, which model are you talking about? Do you see? About the expansion of the universe. Even just last year, some cosmologists said, actually, the universe is not expanding anymore. Now, we gave the meaning to that ayah. Because that ayah, tradition just meant the universe is big. That's what it meant. I think it was Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu. He said the universe is vast and Allah has provided rizq in the universe. That's it. Do you see my point? We superimpose stuff on the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to be very careful. And we deify science. We've made science the God. It's not. It's the pixel. Allah has the picture. And that's, if we approach it that way, we'll always be cool. Bring bring any contention, any scientist, khalas, no problem. I did this once in Hyde Park. I stood up, started talking about something. I was like, oh, the Quran says science thing is wrong. This science thing in the Quran is wrong. I said, so what? I said, what's science based upon? Induction. Does induction lead to certainty? No. Can you have a future observation that contradicts previous conclusions? Yes. So relax. Everyone started laughing at him. And he agreed. Do you see my point? And Allah knows best.
Since you mentioned, I guess, quantum fluctuations, I do have a question myself now, since we discussed it also a couple of days ago. Stephen Hawking basically wrote a whole book trying to prove that basically the universe can come out of nothing, which is total absurdity from the Muslim mind perspective and intellectual. Talking about basically quantum laws of physics with quantum vacuum leading to the existence of the universe. What do you say about this? How do you advise people to approach it?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about definitions. You just need to ask them what do you mean by nothing. Because usually it means something. Like Lawrence Krauss wrote a book on the universe from nothing, and his nothing is something. He always says nothing is very unstable. Because his definition of something, of nothing, is the absence of time and space. But in physics, the absence of time and space, you still have kind of quantum reality. A sea of fluctuating energy. What we mean by nothing is absence of anything, no thing. So his nothing is quite funny. He's changing the linguistic, he's playing the linguistic gymnastics. His nothing is like saying, you know what, I had dinner last night and it was nothing. Yeah. So ask them what they mean by nothing. And secondly, what I remember about Stephen Hawking's approach was that you still needed gravity in order for the universe to emerge. Now this was a quantum type of gravity, but they don't not understand gravity anyway. All this stuff is theoretical rubbish. It's speculative. They just it just gives them money for books. If you go to original research, they would say themselves, this is speculative. We don't have enough empirical evidence to justify this. So I would take it seriously. Honestly, use that book for a doormat. Yeah? Not that we should do that to books here. We should respect books, but I'm using mubalagha, hyperbole, just to raise the point. It's not serious stuff. Even Lawrence Krauss said, this is tentative, plausible. We don't have enough empirical evidence to justify my conclusion. So don't worry. So he presumes gravity. But gravity only works if you have physical objects. Because gravity is the force of attraction between two physical things. And I know quantum gravity is a little bit different, but you still need stuff there, even if it's energy. So his nothing is not nothing, per se. Do you see? And that's what we just, have to be a bit more critical. I remember once when the Higgs boson was discovered, it was a particle that made up the Higgs field. And they used to call it the God particle. So in the popular magazines, the God particle was found. I got emails saying, my mind is low, bro. They found the God particle. And I'm like, you know what the Higgs boson was? It was a particle that was found that made up the Higgs field. The Higgs field was switched on in the early universe to give particles mass, apart from the photon. What's very interesting is, it took them a long time to find it. So they called it the goddamn particle. But because of how the media works, they shortened it to the God particle. So it had nothing to do with God. It was called the goddamn particle because they couldn't find it. Yeah, and what Muslims, we read on the newspaper and think, oh my God, what's happened? Because we've deified, it's like a conceptualization shirk. It's like the shirk of ideas. Like you've made this, you made the media into the sources of your wahi. You made these magazines the sources of your revelation. And then now you think revelation has to catch up. Well, find out what they said first. Go straight to the paper and you see it's usually always speculative.
Question. I will take this first because it's all the hand first, inshallah. Again, I will take the sister question next to it. Go ahead.
I have two questions, if that's okay. The first question.
One question, sir.
You're greedy with your questions.
It's very short.
Go ahead. One question.
So the first question, is it possible if you can expand on the philosophy of science? And the second one, when it comes to epistemology and gaining knowledge, you have testimony and observation. If we say observation is limited, and it is limited, and we say testimony is only valid way of source of information unless it's mutawatir, that can lead to skepticism. So how can we cut that off from the source?
Barakallahu feek.
So which one do you want to take?
I'll take the testimony one. I need to understand your question first. So you're saying observation can be limited, and testimony is only accepted as certainty if it's mutawatir. And you're saying that may lead to skepticism.
No, I'm saying like observation is limited.
Yes.
Because like
Yes,
explained.
agreed.
And I'm saying testimony, if we want to take testimony as a certain way of gaining information, we're gonna have to take mutawatir testimony.
Yes.
I don't know how to say that.
That's what I'm saying. It's called recurrent reporting.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so
correct.
that if somebody wants to be like a skeptic, he would use that point of view to say, oh, but unless it is something mutawatir, then we can say that this is 100% true or certain.
Yeah, I personally disagree with it. I think you can have knowledge outside of the mutawatir tradition. It depends how you define knowledge. Remember, there's levels of certainty. You have ilm al-yaqeen, haqq al-yaqeen, ayn al-yaqeen. You have different levels of certainty. The certainty of knowledge, the certainty of seeing things, the certainty of it being the truth because by virtue of its own existence. Yeah. So, these are grey areas as well because there is no difference of opinion on what is mutawatir in the first place. Was it 3, 5 chains, 6 chains? So, look, the point here is, when it comes to these things, don't expect, an angel coming down from the clouds and saying, I'm telling you Allah exists. It doesn't work that way. The problem is when you expect too much from human knowledge. That's the problem. We have limited tools, and with those limited tools, we can form good conclusions. That's how you should see it. And these are things to wake up what is already self-evidently true, which is the fitrah. Now, for you to now conclude skepticism is the right way, is the necessary conclusion from what you've just said, those skeptics are ridiculous. Because skepticism is actually a very self-defeating philosophy. Because skepticism says that there is no truth. Oh yeah? What about that statement? Is it true that there is no truth? So the minute they accept that statement, then they can't be skeptics anymore. They have to accept that there is no truth, and it's true. But you just said that there is no truth. But you have to believe it's true that there is no truth. Do you see my point? Also, if there were skeptics about the laws of physics, they could never build a building. You can be skeptical about the laws of physics, easily in philosophy. But if you did that all the time, you'd have nothing. You wouldn't be formed. You just stay in your home, do nothing. So skepticism is impractical and it's self-defeating. So I don't think that, and let me tell you something, it's all psychological. The minute somebody becomes skeptical because of theology and God's existence, is the minute it has nothing to do with philosophy. Listen to me, bro. This guy needs therapy. This guy needs love. He needs coffee. He needs food. He needs shawarma. He needs a connection with you. Because if he's using skepticism excessively to deny God, then it's an emotional problem. You got him, bro. He's there, convinced, he's close. Because for all of his life, he uses rationality, common sense, normal reason, cause and effect, inferences. He uses all of that stuff for banking, for law, for his life, for getting married, for getting divorced, for having children, for buying clothes, for studying, for passing his exams, for driving in the car, for fixing his car. He uses all of these normal rational laws. But the minute God comes into question, well, we don't know, man. It's all skeptical. So he's got one yardstick for all of his life and everything, and another yardstick for God. What does that expose about this? That's why sometimes ikhwan and akhawat, brothers and sisters, don't think that it's always using reasoning. From experience, you realize, I'll stop here. I'm going to buy him a drink. I'm going to connect with him. Halal, yeah, of course. No, well, you can have a pint of milk, right? Kind of milk in the coffee shop. So, do you see my point, Chef? And then you see, when they get like that, then you should just feel some sakina, say, we've got him intellectually. You don't want to expose that, because you don't want to break his ego too much, and you want to remain humble. Just change the subject side and say, okay, I think I've planted the seed. Let's have some dinner, man. Let's connect. And then you see that, and you see that building trust is sometimes more important than even telling people about Islam. Wallahi, if you told someone, I don't know, that would be the best da'wah you can give them. Because many Muslims don't know how to say that, because we're mad. We think we're we should become quantum physicists overnight, biologists, physicists, philosophers, we know all the answers. This is rubbish. Just convey that which you know. Don't make things up. See, you don't know. If you don't know, ask those who know. Khalas. And building trust is so important. Absolutely important. The Prophet ﷺ had a mushrik in his house, a polytheist. He gave him 7 bowls of milk, and in the morning he had 1 bowl of milk because he became a Muslim. I believe if the mushrik asked for 70 bowls of milk, I think the Prophet would have given it. So the point here is he built trust, connected with people. When was the last time you had a non-Muslim in your house having dinner? You see my point? So these things are emotional for them, and you see it. And that's why sometimes, even in the philosophy of the mind, they would even deny that we have an internal conscious awareness, just for their materialism to be sound. They're called eliminative materialists. They come up with absurdities, honestly, just for their worldview to remain the worldview. And not just that, even in science or philosophy, they will do things what I call God replacements. For example, the multiverse, infinite number of eternal universes, powerful, that can create other universes. It doesn't sound like God to me, man. Yeah? Qul huwa Allahu ahad right here. Or even in philosophy of the mind, they have this theory called panpsychism, that consciousness is everywhere. It created other consciousness. It's eternal. It's fundamental. Again, it's like a God replacement. And that's because of the lenses of their work. The secular academia wants to deny God. That's part of its project. And it's implied in its project. And I think it's changing now. Definitely. Before they rejected all metaphysics. Now it's creeping back in. And they may have to accept it at some point. And they will, but you just have to, every generation has its struggles. And our generational struggle is reviving our classical scholarship and contemporizing in a way that we understand. Because we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Al-Ghazali and others. You just need to contemporize their stuff. Al-Ghazali had a good cosmological argument. He had a good spiritual argument as well. Al-Ghazali's later arguments were probably better. Meaning experience Quran and Sunnah, experience the teachings, and that would be enough. His one key proof for prophethood was that if you take all the hadith, 1,000 hadith, apply them, everything those hadiths say will come true in your life. In the experiential aspect of Islam. You even have Ibn Taymiyyah, who wrote his thesis essentially on the problem of evil, dealing with why is there suffering in the world? Why is there suffering in the world? And he said, because Allah is wise and everything is in line with a good, wise purpose. So we have lots of ulama that we're standing on their shoulders. And we need to humbly just contemporize what they said and maybe refine it a bit. So I'm just saying this to show that we're not alone. We have this tradition. We just have to revise it. I forgot the other question.
Okay, we'll take one more question.
Yes.
So 2 more questions. There was a sister who raised her hand first. Anybody wants to go from the sisters? Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, so my question is around, atheism is relatively easier to debunk. But what about when you approach people that do believe in God? So God exists, so the concept of deism that he doesn't exactly have. He exists, but he's not...
The absentee landlord.
Yeah, he's not because, I don't know, there's not that sense perception of God really, intervening in life. How do you explain, how do you debunk deism?
Not even agnostic, basically. You're saying a person
you do believe God exists, God's there, he's distinct from us, he is one, but he has nothing to do with the planet, and he's not intervening in life.
Very secular.
He's...
Alright, very lovely.
The way I would address this really is 2 ways. Number one, actually just one way. Just show them the Quran. And that's it. They just need to know who Allah is. That's it.
Yeah, but they don't believe in that book, so why?
Yeah, I know, so show reasons why they should. That's the point.
Let's give one reason.
Yeah, there's a few reasons, but you need to understand the first point, which is to solve this matter is to make sure that they understand that this book is from Allah. Once they know it's from Allah, then whatever the book says is going to be true. It's like spiritual algebra. If God said X, what's the truth value of X? It's true. X is the unknown, right? Put anything in there. If God says something, then it's going to be true. So you need to say to them, I believe this is what God said. And here are my reasons. There's many reasons. The linguistic miracle of the Quran, the unique structural features of the Quran, the reveals lost knowledge, so many different things. And when you start learning about that, about the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, including its spirituality, its impact and everything else, you'll be able to say, look, this book is from Allah. So you can't be a deist anymore because you know He's announced Himself to mankind. Do you see? Now, there's a good book that you can read and you can share with your non-Muslim friends. There's an e-book version. If you go to onereason.org/Eternal Challenge, you could download a book. It's a new book that discusses about 6 to 8 arguments why the Quran is from Allah. So go to onereason.org. Okay, onereason.org.
We'll take one more last question. I think you had your hand up, inshallah. Go ahead.
I volunteer with an MSA in a college close by. And I used to teach, I learned it from IR, the Gumrah method for Dawah. And while teaching it, I faced a question that I couldn't really answer. It's about causality, which is, it went a bit into imagination where if we're saying that we have a beginning, so that we need a creator that does not have a beginning. But what if there's a different kind of beginning for that creator that's different than ours?
A different beginning of the creator, other than
a different kind of beginning than what we could understand.
Oh, we can't understand. Okay.
This is what I call the fallacy of the phantom option. It's the fallacy of the ghost option. Because you know that reasoning implies you could say anything. What if, bro, that you're not really asking me a question about causality? What if you're not really here, I'll just make you up? What if, bro, that, you're just a ghost? What if, bro, that you're just an alien from Mars that's been designed as a human, that's trying to manipulate my mind? What if, bro? That's how I reply to stupid questions. Because think about the question, bro. What if there's a different type of beginning? He's basically saying nothing. What do you mean by different type of beginning? I don't know, it could be different. Okay. Maybe you're different. Yeah. Do you see my point? Some things shouldn't even be responded to. So you think we have to answer everything. Like one atheist said to me once, what was God doing for eternity before He created us? I'm like, what kind of stupid question is that? I said, you didn't know me for 35 years. You just met me now. Just because you didn't know what I was doing for 35 years doesn't mean I didn't exist. Do you see my point? And he said, oh yeah, but I know you more than I know the Creator. No, you don't. You just met me. God, He's given His names and attributes. You never know my attributes. Yeah? You see, so some people just say, just tell them to shush. So if you think it's a valid question, good. When you wake up from your intellectual coma, let me know. Because some are intellectually comatose. They're walking, but they're automatons, they're automatic biological robots. They just don't think. There's a different kind of beginning. What does that mean? I don't know. It's like saying nothing is something. What does a different type of beginning mean? Because you're still implying a beginning. Whether it's different or it's irrelevant. Because the difference maybe applies on the how it began. So you still referring to beginning, still back to the same question. You can't have an infinite regress of thoughts. So just break down the words and analyze. It's like when people say, oh, if God's so powerful, can He create a stone He can't move? And I usually say to people, yeah, He can create a stone He can't move and He can move it. Stupid questions require stupid answers. Because you know the question, can God create a stone He can't move? It's not actually a contention against Islam or God. Because what He's saying, it's a paradox. It's a meaningless statement. He might have said that to you in Chinese. Because what He's saying is, an all-powerful being is now not an all-powerful being. Because can God, who's all-powerful, create a stone that He can't move? Can He be not all-powerful? But in the sentence you require Him to be powerful. And then you're negating Him by saying He's not powerful. It's just a contradiction. It doesn't make any sense. It's an oxymoron. It's like saying, can you have a square triangle? Wait a minute, a square is 4 sides, a triangle is 3 sides. You can't have a square triangle, man. So by definition, Allah is all-powerful. So whatever He does is in line with that. That's the point. It's just simple. You see my point? So just say to them, if you don't know what you mean, then you can't raise it as an option. Because intellectually, you have to have something that's substantial. You can't say, what if there's a different beginning? And you can say, what if there's a different beginning? What if there's a different beginning? You can make things up, right? You can just make things up, and then you would have no conversations. Tell them to be rational. It's the most rational approach to the situation. Even if you say there's a different beginning, maybe you're referring to there's a different how things begin. You still imply a beginning. If that's the case, that can't be the case because you'll have an infinite regress of causes, which is impossible. So therefore, there must be an eternal cause.
Jazakumullah khair, may Allah bless you and bless all this effort, inshallah. This was the last question, inshallah. Should we take one more?
Go on.
Go ahead, because you raise your hand before. Go ahead.
So my question was about the Quran. How can you
A little bit louder, inshallah.
Sorry?
A little bit louder, inshallah.
Yeah. So my question was about the Quran. How can we prove for Christians who went far from their religion because of the contradictions in the Bible? How can we prove for them that the Quran is unchangeable and it's a miracle and it's not like the Bible?
So how can you prove basically the Quran is a miracle and unchangeable?
Onereason.org. Honestly, just download it on your phone. Do it right now. I can do it now. I know Shaitan plays with us. If we don't do it now, you won't get it. Go to onereason.org and download the book. And you have all the answers. Very well written. It goes through preservation of Quran. It goes through linguistic miracle. It goes through the structural miracle. It goes through the coherence. It goes through its relevancy. It goes through the fact that it reveals us knowledge. It goes through the impact of the Quran. It goes through the spirituality of the Quran. It goes through God's existence. You got everything there. One logical point. Let me think. No, let me think. Okay. So one interesting point about the Quran is that every single chapter in the Quran has a unique structure in the way that it has been structured thematically. And you don't need to know anything about the Arabic language to appreciate this. You could just read it in English and you know there are themes, so it's structured in a thematic way. Now what's interesting is that if you take one chapter, you can analyze its structure. For example, Surah Al-Baqarah. That's the largest chapter in the Quran. It was revealed over a 9-year period, specifically for 2 years. More intensely over 2 years. And many of the ayat were revealed for specific times and places. What's interesting about Surah Al-Baqarah is that you have something called ring composition. The way the themes have been structured is like in the ring shape. And ring composition, there's different forms of ring composition, but one form is if you put a mirror in the middle of the text, what's in the beginning of the text is mirrored thematically in the rest of the text. And Surah Al-Baqarah is like that. Okay? So I don't have the board to write, but you have, say, ring, you have a middle theme, where the mirror is supposed to be, then each theme is reflected. So it's a ring composition. And what's interesting, if you look at the middle theme, it's about the present, the changing of the Qibla. Previous to that, it's about the past, after that, it's about the future. And each ring has a ring within it. So one ring has another ring, which is the famous ayah, 255, Ayatul Kursi. And that has a ring structure. If you analyze, it's a shame we don't have a board, but if you analyze Ayatul Kursi, you have a middle theme. He knows what's before them, what's after them. Right? It's the middle theme, and it's interesting before them and after them. And each verse mirrors each other. One's about Allah's creative power, His will, He doesn't tire Him, no, He doesn't sleep. Yeah? It's a ring. So there are ring structures within ring structures. That's why I say to brothers that you should never give your wife any mahar. Just give her Quran, because you have rings within a ring. So what you want, sisters? A diamond ring or rings with a ring from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yeah? Okay, so I didn't give you the argument. So the argument is, because many other literature has ring composition, doesn't mean it's a miracle. But the reason this is interesting is because Surah Al-Baqarah and the whole of the Quran was wrote over 23-year period for specific times and places. Yet it has this amazing ring composition, this amazing thematic structure. And yet many of these verses were for future times. Many of these verses were for specific times and places. This means that the author who designed this must have known the future. And if you know the future, this makes sense of God. So that's one argument that's in the book, but there's more detail in it. Many of our classical ulama talked about this, and even modern Orientalists like Raymond Farrand, etc. So I'm jet lagged and I feel quite, about to collapse. I need some good Turkish coffee. Yeah.
Barakallah feek, Jazakallah khair. We're going to end it here, inshallah. Big thanks for our brother Hamza, inshallah, who actually accepted our quick and last minute invitation. And huge thanks for the audience who, within a couple hours, literally we have over 100 people in this room. May Allah bless you guys. I hope that you enjoyed the lecture and learned something, inshallah. Barakallah feekum. Don't forget, this was a seminar hosted by the i3institute and the Anatolia Masjid. Please go to the Facebook and like our pages so you can actually get event notifications. Barakallah feekum again. Sallallahu ala Rasulil Kareem wa atul da'wana alhamdulillah wa alamin. Barakallah feekum.